This is the story of a woman who thought life and strength were slipping away after 50. But with simple changes in the foods she ate, she not only regained her health, but discovered a legacy of resilience that would inspire everyone around her. A story of hope, renewal, and the hidden strength that lies within us all. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Please share your city or country in the comments below. And join our community of listeners from all around the world. Your comments truly make these stories feel alive. So don't be shy. Drop a hello before we dive into this unforgettable journey. The sun was just beginning to lift itself over the rooftops of the little town of Willow Creek, casting a soft, golden glow across the streets. Saturdays had always been special in this town, not because of anything grand or spectacular, but because of something simple and cherished: the farmers market that sprang to life each week in the town square. Colorful tents lined the cobblestone walkways, filled with baskets of produce, jars of honey glistening like liquid gold, and loaves of freshly baked bread that filled the air with a warmth no bakery in the city could ever replicate. It was here, in this lively hum of neighbors and vendors, that Martha found herself one bright Saturday morning. Martha was 62 years old, a retired teacher who had spent the better part of her life nurturing other people's children. She had always enjoyed walking through the market, but on this particular morning, she felt something different, a mix of nostalgia and yearning, as if she were searching for something she could not yet name. Her steps were steady, though a little slower than they once were, and she carried the same canvas tote bag she had used for years, faded but reliable. She paused first at the stall that displayed apples piled high, their skins shiny and red, and the farmer behind the table greeted her warmly. "Good morning, Miss Martha. Sweetest batch you'll find this season." She smiled, sampling one, and felt the tart juice flood her mouth. It reminded her of the apples she used to pack for her students during field trips, and the thought brought both warmth and a quiet ache to her heart. As she walked further, the market seemed to awaken all her senses. She caught the earthy scent of just picked tomatoes, the peppery fragrance of bunches of basil, and the buttery sweetness of peaches that glistened under the sun. Children ran past her, laughing with their parents trying to keep up, and somewhere down the lane, a musician strummed his guitar, his voice carrying a tune about small-town life and love that seemed to weave itself into the very air. At a corner stall draped in checkered cloth, Martha slowed. The vendor, a tall man with kind eyes and sun-browned skin, was offering samples of something she hadn't seen in years: freshly roasted beets, sliced and sprinkled with herbs. "Give it a try," he encouraged, holding out a small toothpick. Martha hesitated at first. She hadn't eaten beets since she was a child, when her mother used to boil them until the whole house smelled earthy and strange. But she accepted the sample anyway. The moment the beet touched her tongue, something stirred deep inside her. It was earthy and sweet, both grounding and strangely uplifting. It did not taste like the boiled beets she remembered, but something far more vibrant, alive almost. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the flavor linger, and in that moment, a memory came rushing back to her. Her mother's kitchen, sunlit and warm, the counters covered with bowls of vegetables from their backyard garden, her mother's hands busy at work, chopping, stirring, tasting. Her mother had always insisted that food was more than nourishment. It was life itself, a kind of medicine for the body and soul. When Martha opened her eyes, she noticed the farmer smiling knowingly, as though he understood the memory she had just visited. "Nature's gift," he said softly, "keeps us strong if we let it." She nodded, taking another piece and feeling a spark of curiosity ignite within her. Could it really be that simple? Could the strength she longed to feel again, the energy, the vitality she thought she had left behind in her 50s, be hidden in foods like these? She moved slowly through the rest of the market, her mind now turning over questions she hadn't thought of in years. She noticed the rainbow colors of the produce with new eyes, the deep blues of blueberries, the leafy greens of kale, the fiery oranges of carrots and pumpkins. Each seemed to whisper something she had not heard before, as though they were calling out their secrets, waiting for her to listen. By the time she reached the end of the market, Martha's tote bag was full. She had apples, spinach, a loaf of sourdough, jars of honey, and of course, a bundle of those roasted beets wrapped carefully in brown paper. She walked back home along the quiet street, the sound of her footsteps mingling with the distant laughter from the square. At home, Martha placed her groceries on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment in silence. The late morning light streamed through the window, falling across the wooden table that had once been the center of her family's life. She could almost see her children there again, long grown now, doing homework while she cooked dinner, or her husband reading the paper as the aroma of her cooking filled the room. But today, the house was quiet, and in that silence, she heard her mother's words echoing, "Food is life, Martha. Don't ever forget that." She took a deep breath, picked up one of the beets, and held it in her hand. It was just a root vegetable, humble and unassuming, yet it carried with it the promise of something more. For the first time in years, Martha felt a flicker of excitement, like she was standing at the beginning of a journey she had not expected to take. A journey not just toward eating better, but toward rediscovering the strength, vitality, and joy she thought she had left behind. As the clock ticked softly in the background, she began washing the vegetables, her hands moving with a rhythm that felt familiar, comforting, almost sacred. She didn't know exactly where this path would lead, but in that small moment, with the scent of earth and freshness filling her kitchen, Martha knew one thing for certain: she was ready to find out. The kitchen had always been the heart of Martha's childhood home, a place where warmth seemed to radiate not only from the stove, but from the very walls themselves. As she washed and trimmed the beets from the farmer's market, the earthy scent rising into the air, she found herself drifting back to those days long ago when her mother ruled the kitchen with wisdom that seemed simple at the time, but now felt profound. She could see her mother's hands clearly in her mind's eye, strong yet gentle, always busy, always purposeful. Those hands had kneaded bread dough in the early hours of the morning, rolled out pie crusts on Sundays, and lifted steaming pots of soup on winter nights. Nothing was ever wasted in her mother's kitchen. Every peel, every stalk, every leftover scrap was turned into something nourishing. To young Martha, it had just been the way things were. But now, with 62 years of life behind her, she realized how rare and beautiful those habits truly were. Her mother had believed in food not just as sustenance, but as medicine, though she never used the words superfoods or followed diets written in glossy magazines. She grew her own vegetables, picked wild berries when summer came, and kept chickens that supplied fresh eggs each morning. When one of the children caught a cold, her remedy was a steaming bowl of chicken soup filled with garlic, carrots, and herbs. When fatigue set in after long days of school and chores, she'd brew a tea from mint and honey that seemed to chase weariness away. It was all so ordinary back then, yet extraordinary in hindsight. Martha remembered how her mother, even in her 70s, had moved with a lightness that surprised people. She could carry baskets of laundry up the stairs without complaint, tend the garden for hours, and still cook dinner for the whole family. Martha had marveled at her energy, but never thought to ask how she maintained it. Now, as her own body felt heavier, her joints stiffer, and her nights less restful, she wished she could sit down with her mother again, ask her the questions she never asked, and listen with the wisdom she had now. The beets finished roasting, filling Martha's kitchen with a sweet aroma. She sat down at her old wooden table and took her first bite, savoring the flavor as though it held a message from the past. She thought about the foods she had eaten over the last decade: quick frozen dinners when she didn't feel like cooking, fast food picked up on the way home, too much sugar during holidays, and too little fresh produce in between. It wasn't that she hadn't cared, it was simply that life had gotten busy, and later, lonelier. Cooking for one never felt the same as cooking for a family, and so she had let the habit slip away. But as she ate, another memory surfaced. Her mother humming a hymn while stirring a pot of vegetable stew, the sunlight slanting across her face. "Strong food makes strong people, Martha," she used to say, tapping the spoon lightly against the rim of the pot. "What you put into your body shows on the outside and the inside. Don't ever forget that." Martha smiled through the lump rising in her throat, realizing how easily she had forgotten. She leaned back in her chair, the flavors lingering on her tongue, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of hope. Maybe her strength hadn't disappeared forever. Maybe it was only waiting for her to remember the lessons her mother had already given her. She imagined her mother there beside her, nodding with approval, reminding her that it was never too late to begin again. Her gaze wandered to the stack of cookbooks gathering dust on the kitchen shelf. Most were gifts she had never opened, filled with recipes she once thought were too complicated or unnecessary. Now they seemed like treasures waiting to be discovered. She pulled one down, flipping through its pages, and her eyes caught on a recipe for a spinach and walnut salad, bright with pomegranate seeds. It wasn't something her mother would have made, yet the idea thrilled her. Food could connect her to the past and also open doors to something new. That night, as Martha prepared her simple dinner, she set the table with more care than she had in years. A small vase of flowers from her yard sat in the middle, and she lit a candle, just as her mother used to do. The house felt less empty, as though the rituals themselves carried company with them. As she lifted her fork, she whispered softly, "Here's to you, Mama. You knew the secret all along." And in that quiet moment, Martha understood that she wasn't just remembering her mother's kitchen. She was beginning to rebuild her own, one meal, one choice, one memory at a time. The following week, Martha found herself sitting in the familiar waiting room of Dr. Harris's office. She had been seeing him for years, a kind man in his early 70s who still practiced medicine because he loved people, not because he needed to. His gray hair was always neatly combed, and he had a way of making patients feel like they were his only concern, never rushing, never dismissing. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic, yet the soft paintings of landscapes on the walls and the well-worn magazines on the table made it feel less clinical and more like a neighbor's parlor. Martha had scheduled this appointment months earlier, just her regular checkup, but as she sat there, her bag of farmer's market produce still fresh in her mind, she couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. Something inside her whispered that this visit would mean more than the usual blood pressure check and small talk about the weather. When her name was called, she followed the nurse down the hallway, her sensible shoes clicking lightly against the linoleum. After the usual weighing, blood pressure cuff, and a polite reminder to relax your arm, Martha found herself seated across from Dr. Harris. He studied her chart for a moment, then looked up with a gentle smile. "Well, Martha," he began, "your numbers are not terrible, but they're not quite where we'd like them to be either. Your cholesterol is edging higher than I'd prefer, and your bone density scan shows some thinning. Nothing alarming yet, but enough to make us pay attention." Martha nodded, though she felt a small knot tighten in her chest. She had expected to hear something like this. Her body had been hinting at it with every stiff morning and every night of restless sleep. Still, hearing it aloud from a doctor made it real in a way she hadn't wanted to face. Dr. Harris leaned back in his chair, his hands folded thoughtfully. "Now, I could prescribe medication, and in some cases, that's necessary. But before we go down that road, I'd like you to consider something else. Food, Martha. The right foods can be more powerful than medicine. You'd be surprised how much strength, energy, and even healing can come from your diet. Have you thought much about what you're eating lately?" Her cheeks warmed as she admitted, "Not really, not until recently. I used to cook more when the children were home, but these days, it's just me. I've fallen into simpler habits, not the healthiest ones." He nodded knowingly, not in judgment, but in understanding. "That's very common, but the truth is your body needs you to care for it now more than ever. After 50, we don't bounce back the way we used to. But we can thrive if we give ourselves the right fuel. Think of it like maintaining a car. Would you put bad fuel in an engine you want to last another 20 years? Martha chuckled softly, the analogy hitting home. "No, I suppose not." "Exactly, and you don't need to overhaul everything at once. Small changes add up, more vegetables, especially leafy greens, healthy fats from nuts and fish, less processed food, more whole grains, and don't underestimate berries. They're like little jewels for your brain and heart." His words settled in her mind like seeds planted in fresh soil. She thought of the blueberries she had passed at the market, the walnuts she had glanced at but not bought, the salmon fillets displayed on ice at the fishmonger's stall. Suddenly they seemed less like random foods and more like tools, tools she could use to rebuild her strength. As the appointment drew to a close, Harris looked at her with a seriousness that was both gentle and firm. You still have so much life ahead of you, Martha. Don't let your body slow you down. Let food be part of your medicine. Trust me, it makes all the difference. She thanked him and walked out into the cool afternoon air, her mind buzzing. She could still hear his words. The right foods can be more powerful than medicine. They echoed with the same certainty she remembered in her mother's voice years ago, when she spoke of food as life itself. It was as though her mother and Dr. Harris were speaking in unison across time, urging her toward the same truth. Driving home, Martha felt a stirring of resolve. She wasn't ready to surrender to pills and decline. She wanted to feel strong again, to reclaim the lightness she remembered from her youth, to move with the kind of vitality her mother had carried so effortlessly. If food truly held the key, then she was determined to find the door it unlocked. That evening, as she unpacked her groceries from the market, she placed the apples, spinach, and beets on the counter with a new sense of purpose. They weren't just ingredients anymore. They were possibilities, perhaps even promises. For the first time in a long while, Martha felt like she was not simply eating to get by, but beginning a journey of healing and rediscovery. And in the quiet of her kitchen, she whispered to herself the words she had heard that day, letting them take root in her heart. The right foods can be more powerful than medicine. A few days later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Martha was walking down Main Street, her scarf wrapped snugly around her neck, when she heard a familiar voice call out her name. She turned, and there stood Clara Mitchell, a woman she had not seen in nearly a decade. Clara had been her colleague back when they both taught at Willow Creek High School, a kindred spirit who shared her love of literature and late afternoon cups of coffee in the teacher's lounge. But time and distance had carried them apart after retirement, and Martha had often wondered how Clara was faring. What she saw now left her momentarily speechless. Clara, at 68, looked radiant. Her hair, silver as moonlight, framed a face that glowed with vitality. Her posture was upright, her steps light, and her smile as warm as Martha remembered. She looked younger, in a way Martha couldn't quite describe. There was an energy in her presence that seemed to shine from the inside out. "Martha, I can't believe it's you," Clara exclaimed, wrapping her in a hug. "You haven't changed a bit." Martha laughed softly, though she knew that wasn't true. She had felt the weight of the years pressing on her body more than ever lately. But standing beside Clara, she couldn't help but feel a pang of curiosity and envy. They decided to catch up over coffee at the small cafe on the corner, a cozy place with wooden tables and the smell of roasted beans in the air. As they settled in, Martha couldn't hold back her question. "Clara, you look incredible. Honestly, what's your secret? You seem so vibrant." Clara's eyes sparkled, and she leaned forward with the eagerness of someone who had been waiting to share a story. "You won't believe me, Martha, but it's food. I changed what I eat. That's all." Martha raised her eyebrows. "Food, really?" "Yes," Clara said with conviction. "About 10 years ago, I was struggling, tired all the time, my joints ached, my doctor warned me about my heart. I thought, well, this is just aging. But then I met a nutritionist who told me I didn't have to accept that. She helped me shift to a diet filled with real living foods. Salmon twice a week, handfuls of walnuts and almonds, leafy greens every day, berries whenever I could get them. Whole grains instead of white bread, olive oil instead of butter. Slowly, I felt the fog lift. My joints stopped screaming at me. My energy came back. Even my mood improved." Martha listened in rapt attention, each word striking something deep inside her. It sounded so much like what Dr. Harris had told her, yet hearing it from Clara, someone she knew, someone she trusted, made it real in a different way. Clara's transformation was living proof. "It wasn't overnight," Clara continued, stirring her tea thoughtfully. "It took months, even a year. But little by little, I became stronger. My doctor was astonished. He said my numbers were those of a woman 10 years younger, and now I feel better at 68 than I did at 55. Martha felt a flutter in her chest, half hope, half longing. Could it truly be possible? Could the answer to her aching bones and waning energy be as simple as filling her plate with the right foods? She thought of her mother again, of the farmer's market, of Dr. Harris's gentle warning. The pieces were falling together like a puzzle she hadn't realized she was trying to solve. Clara reached across the table and squeezed Martha's hand. It's never too late, you know. I wish someone had told me that sooner. We have more control over our health than we think. Every bite we take is a choice, towards strength or away from it. Those words lingered with Martha long after they parted ways. As she walked home that the late afternoon sun painting the streets in shades of amber, she felt a sense of clarity she hadn't known in years. Clara wasn't some stranger in a magazine or a distant success story. She was her friend, a woman who had faced the same challenges and found a way through them. When Martha reached her front porch, she paused, looking out over her quiet street. She felt the stirring of determination rise once more. This was not about chasing youth or denying her age. It was about embracing the years ahead with strength and joy, just as her mother had done, just as Clara was doing now. Inside, she set her bag on the counter and began pulling out the groceries she had bought earlier that day. Spinach, blueberries, a fillet of salmon wrapped in white paper. For the first time, she saw them not just as food, but as allies, as tools to help her rebuild herself from the inside out. She placed the salmon in the refrigerator and the berries in a bowl on the counter, running her fingers lightly over their plump skins. They seemed to shimmer in the fading light, tiny jewels of possibility. And as Martha stood there, she realized she was ready. Not just curious, not just hopeful, but ready to begin her own transformation. The next morning, Martha woke earlier than usual. The house was still and quiet, the sky outside painted in soft hues of lavender and rose as the sun rose slowly over Willow Creek. She padded into the kitchen in her slippers, where the bowl of blueberries she had left on the counter gleamed like tiny sapphires in the morning light. Something about their simple beauty stopped her for a moment. She picked one up, rolling it between her fingers, and thought about what Clara had said, how every bite was a choice, either towards strength or away from it. Instead of reaching for her usual toast with jam, she pulled out the blender that had been gathering dust in the cabinet. Into it went a handful of blueberries, a fistful of spinach, half a banana, and a splash of almond milk she had bought on a whim. The machine whirred to life, and soon she was holding a glass filled with a drink the color of emeralds and sapphires swirled together. Tentatively, she took a sip. The flavor surprised her. It was bright, sweet, and refreshing, with just a hint of earthiness. It felt alive somehow, as though it carried with it the energy of the garden it had grown in. As she drank, she found herself wondering, what is it about these foods that makes them so powerful? She had always known fruits and vegetables were good for you, but she wanted to understand more deeply. Later that day, she sat at her desk with her old laptop and began to read. What she discovered astonished her. Blueberries, she learned, were not just sweet little fruits. They were bursting with antioxidants, tiny warriors that fought against the damage of time, helping to protect memory and keep the brain sharp. Spinach, too, was no ordinary green leaf. It was rich in calcium for bones, iron for energy, and vitamin K, which her research told her was essential for maintaining strength as one aged. Kale, a vegetable she had always overlooked at the store, turned out to be a powerhouse for the heart, while broccoli was brimming with compounds that supported the body's natural defenses. The more she read, the more she felt as though she had stumbled upon a hidden treasure map, each food a clue leading her closer to the vitality she craved. These weren't miracle cures sold in bottles or advertised on late-night television. They were humble, everyday foods, grown in the earth, waiting patiently for someone to notice their gifts. Martha thought back to her mother's kitchen once again, remembering how she used to insist on serving greens with nearly every meal. At the time, Martha had rolled her eyes, pushing them to the side of her plate. Now she realized her mother had known these truths instinctively, long before science confirmed them. She smiled through the sting of regret, vowing not to waste the wisdom a second time. The following week, she returned to the farmer's market with new eyes. She lingered at the berry stalls, choosing cartons of blueberries, raspberries, and blackberries, their colors glowing like jewels. She picked up bunches of kale, bags of spinach, heads of broccoli, and fresh herbs whose scents seemed to promise health with every inhale. She noticed that other shoppers too seemed to linger over the produce, their baskets filling with the same treasures. It struck her that she was not alone in her quest. There was a quiet movement happening all around her, people choosing strength one meal at a time. Back home, Martha began experimenting in her kitchen, transforming her meals into colorful celebrations. Breakfast became smoothies and oatmeal topped with berries. Lunch turned into bright salads layered with spinach, walnuts, and vinaigrette. Dinner often featured roasted vegetables, seasoned simply but bursting with flavor. She discovered that food prepared with intention and care tasted different, more satisfying, more alive. Within weeks, she noticed small but undeniable changes. Her mornings felt lighter, her energy steadier. She no longer reached for a nap in the middle of the day, and her joints, though still stiff at times, seemed less resistant. She even caught her reflection one morning in the mirror and thought her skin looked more radiant, her eyes brighter. It was subtle, but it was there, and it filled her with encouragement. At night, before bed, she began a little ritual. She would make a cup of green tea, sit by the window, and reflect on her choices that day. She realized that eating these foods was more than a physical act. It was an act of hope, of care, of reclaiming something she thought had been lost. And each night, as she sipped the warm tea, she whispered quietly to herself, "Stronger tomorrow." The foods were no longer just items on her plate. They were companions on her journey, teachers reminding her that strength was not a thing of the past, but a possibility still alive within her. And Martha, for the first time in years, felt that she was stepping into a future not of decline, but of renewal. The kitchen soon became Martha's sanctuary again, not the lonely room it had been for so many years. Each morning, as light spilled through the curtains and danced across the countertops, she felt a sense of anticipation. Cooking was no longer a chore she endured out of necessity. It was becoming a ritual, a small act of love she performed for herself. For the first time since her children had grown and left, the clatter of pots and the scent of simmering herbs filled her home once more. She began with simple dishes, not wanting to overwhelm herself. One evening, she carefully unwrapped a fillet of salmon she had bought from the market. She brushed it with olive oil, sprinkled it with fresh dill, and laid lemon slices across its surface. As it roasted in the oven, the kitchen filled with a fragrance both bright and comforting. She paired it with a salad of spinach, walnuts, and pomegranate seeds, her nod to the recipe she had once glimpsed in her forgotten cookbook. When she sat down at the table, candle flickering beside her, she realized she was smiling. Each bite tasted not just of flavor, but of possibility. The more she cooked, the bolder she became. One night she made a hearty vegetable stew, rich with carrots, kale, and beans. The broth slow simmered until it thickened into something that felt like a hug from her mother's kitchen. On another day, she prepared roasted sweet potatoes tossed with cinnamon and honey, their sweetness reminding her of childhood autumns. Each new meal added to her confidence, teaching her that nourishment didn't have to be complicated. It only required attention and care. She noticed changes in herself, subtle but steady. Her mornings began with energy that carried her through her day. Tasks that once seemed heavy, carrying laundry, raking leaves, even climbing stairs, no longer drained her as they had. At night, she slept more soundly, waking refreshed instead of weary. She even caught herself humming as she stirred a pot or chopped vegetables, a habit she had picked up unconsciously from her mother decades ago. Cooking also awakened something deeper in Martha. It reconnected her to a sense of purpose she hadn't realized she had lost. Preparing meals wasn't simply about feeding her body, it was about honoring herself, acknowledging that she was worthy of care and vitality. For years, she had given her energy to others, her students, her children, her husband, and after retirement, she had drifted into a routine where caring for herself felt secondary. Now, each meal became a quiet declaration: I matter too. On weekends, she invited small groups of friends over, something she hadn't done in ages. She served them her colorful dishes, watching their eyes widen at the flavors. "Martha, this is delicious," one of them exclaimed as they tasted her spinach and walnut salad. "What's your secret?" She only smiled and said, "I suppose it's cooking with purpose." The phrase slipped out naturally, but it stayed with her afterward because it was true. Even shopping took on a new rhythm. The grocery store aisles that once felt overwhelming now seemed like treasure hunts. She filled her cart with rainbow colors: reds from tomatoes, greens from kale, yellows from peppers, deep purples from berries. She found joy in variety, delighting in combinations she had never tried before. The processed foods she used to buy without thought no longer tempted her. They looked lifeless compared to the vibrancy of the fresh produce. One evening, as she stirred a pot of soup, she paused and looked around her kitchen. The soft glow of the lamp on the counter, the warmth of the oven, the aroma of garlic and thyme, it all made her feel profoundly alive. She realized she had reclaimed not only her health, but also a piece of her identity. The teacher in her had always loved nurturing others, but now she was learning to nurture herself. Cooking became a way of telling her body, I hear you, I see you, I will care for you. Each recipe was a lesson, each meal a gift. She began keeping a small notebook on the counter, jotting down her favorite combinations and the little discoveries she made. Blueberries with oatmeal, bright and energizing, one entry read. Another said, spinach and garlic, comforting, grounding. It was as though she was writing a new chapter of her life, one recipe at a time. On a quiet Sunday evening, after finishing a meal of roasted vegetables and quinoa, she carried her tea to the porch and sat watching the sky turn to twilight. She thought about the years behind her, the decades of giving, teaching, and caring for others, and she thought about the years still ahead. For the first time in a long while, she didn't fear them. Instead, she welcomed them with hope. Cooking with purpose had become her path forward, a way of transforming not just her meals, but her life itself. And as the first stars appeared in the sky, Martha whispered to herself with quiet conviction, this is only the beginning. Martha's journey, once a solitary experiment within the walls of her kitchen, began to ripple outward into the world around her. It started innocently enough, just a casual conversation at the farmer's market one Saturday morning. She was reaching for a bundle of kale when a woman around her age smiled and said, that's the good stuff, isn't it? My doctor says it keeps my bones strong. Martha laughed and agreed, and within minutes they were swapping stories about their favorite ways to cook greens. That woman, whose name was Elaine, invited Martha to join a small group that met weekly at the local community center to talk about food, health, and staying active after 50. Martha hesitated at first, worried she might feel out of place, but something inside her urged her to say yes. The following Thursday, she walked into a bright, bustling room filled with laughter and chatter. Tables were set with colorful dishes people had brought to share: quinoa salads, lentil soups, baked salmon, trays of roasted vegetables. The air smelled warm and inviting, almost like Thanksgiving, but with a lighter, fresher spirit. Elaine waved her over and introduced her to the group, a mix of men and women in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, all eager to learn from one another and exchange their discoveries. At first, Martha listened more than she spoke, soaking in the stories. One man, tall and spry with silver hair, described how he had reversed his high blood pressure by replacing processed snacks with nuts and seeds. A soft-spoken woman shared how she had taken up making smoothies with berries and spinach, gave her enough energy to keep up with her grandchildren. Each story reminded Martha that she was not walking this path alone. There were countless others who had felt the same fatigue, the same uncertainty, and had found renewal through simple changes. When it came time for her to speak, Martha told them about her roasted salmon and her rediscovery of joy in cooking. She admitted how lost she had felt after retiring, how food had become an afterthought, and how a single recipe had rekindled something inside her. To her surprise, the group leaned in closely, nodding, smiling, some even scribbling notes. That sounds delicious, someone said. Will you write the recipe down for us? Martha felt her cheeks flush, but she agreed, realizing in that moment that her journey could be of value not just to herself, but to others. The weekly gatherings soon became one of the brightest parts of her life. She looked forward to them with the same anticipation she once had for her classroom full of students. Each Thursday, she would try a new recipe, carefully test it during the week, and then bring it to share with her new friends. Her spinach and walnut salad became a favorite among the group, as did her honey-glazed sweet potatoes. But more than the food itself, it was the camaraderie, the laughter, and the sense of shared purpose that nourished her spirit. Outside the community center, friendships blossomed. She and Elaine began meeting for walks in the park, discussing not just food but life, family, memories, even the fears of aging they both carried. Another member, Jim, invited Martha to join a weekend cooking class he was taking at the library, where local chefs demonstrated how to prepare healthy dishes on a budget. Martha accepted, and soon she found herself immersed in a world of creativity and learning she hadn't experienced in years. Her family noticed the changes too. When her daughter visited one weekend, she was stunned to see her mother so animated, bustling around the kitchen, chatting excitedly about her new friends. "Mom, you look different," she said with a mixture of surprise and relief. "Happier, healthier." Martha smiled and replied simply, "I think I finally found my people." What touched her most deeply was how much everyone in the group supported one another. When someone struggled to stay on track, the rest offered encouragement instead of judgment. If someone's arthritis flared or they slipped back into old eating habits, the group reminded them that it wasn't about perfection, but persistence. That spirit of compassion gave Martha courage, reminding her that growth was a journey, not a destination. One evening, after returning home from a particularly lively meeting, Martha sat at her kitchen table and reflected on how much her world had changed. Only months earlier, she had felt isolated, invisible, drifting through her days without purpose. Now she felt surrounded by warmth, as if by people who understood her struggles and celebrated her victories. She realized that health wasn't just about food or exercise, it was about community, about belonging to something larger than herself. As the weeks rolled on, she began to see that this group was more than just a gathering of like minded people. It was a circle of resilience, a reminder that life after 50 wasn't a slow decline, but a season of rediscovery. With every shared meal and every laugh around the table, Martha's belief grew stronger that it was never too late to reclaim one's strength, never too late to create a new chapter filled with vitality and hope. That night, as she closed her recipe notebook after jotting down yet another dish to bring to the next meeting, Martha whispered with quiet gratitude, "I am not alone anymore." And for the first time in decades, she felt not just healthy, but whole. Life was beginning to feel lighter, steadier, as if Martha had stepped into a new rhythm that matched the beating of her heart. Yet even in this season of renewal, shadows of doubt crept in, quiet but persistent. It happened one rainy evening when she was alone in the house, the sound of the storm tapping against her windows. She had just returned from a joyous gathering at the community center, where she had shared her homemade lentil stew to warm applause. But now the house felt empty again, the silence pressing in, and her old companion, loneliness, stirred restlessly in the corners of her mind. As she walked into the kitchen, her eyes drifted toward the cupboard that still held remnants of her old ways. A box of cookies tucked on the top shelf, leftover crackers from months past. For a moment, she stood there, frozen, feeling the pull of comfort she used to find in such simple, sugary bites. What harm could one cookie do? She whispered to herself. The thought felt like a betrayal, yet it was achingly tempting. Her fingers brushed against the edge of the box, and for the first time in months, she felt the tug of war between her new self and her old habits. The following week, temptation wore a different face. Martha's daughter invited her to a Sunday brunch at a diner they had frequented for years. It was a place filled with memories, pancakes dripping with syrup, thick bacon that sizzled on the griddle, omelets drowned in melted cheese. When the waitress handed her the menu, Martha's heart sank. She wanted to please her daughter, to enjoy the moment without fuss, but her eyes kept scanning the page, torn between the comfort foods of her past and the mindful choices she had embraced. "What are you getting, Mom?" her daughter asked cheerfully. Martha hesitated, her throat tightening. Would it seem silly to order a bowl of fruit when everyone else was enjoying stacks of pancakes? She chose the oatmeal, topping it with nuts and fresh berries. But as the plates arrived at the table, she caught herself staring at the syrup, sliding across her daughter's pancakes. A flicker of regret passed through her, as though she had denied herself joy. Later, driving home, she felt unsettled, her mind circling around the question, was she truly living, or was she restricting herself too much? Doubts deepened further when Jim from the wellness group admitted during one meeting that he had fallen off track. He had indulged in fried chicken and pie at a family reunion and confessed to feeling guilty afterward. Martha listened quietly, but inside she felt both sympathy and fear. If Jim could slip, so could she. That night, she lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, the echoes of his words lingering. Maybe this new life is too fragile, she thought. Maybe I'm not strong enough to keep it up. It was in this moment of weakness that Elaine, her friend from the group, reached out. Martha, she said over coffee one afternoon, we all stumble. But stumbling doesn't erase the road we've already walked. The important thing is that we keep moving forward. Martha felt a warmth spread through her chest at Elaine's words. She realized that part of her struggle was not just about resisting food, but about learning to forgive herself when she faltered. The true test came one weekend when Martha's sister, Linda, came to visit from out of state. Linda had never been one to worry about her diet, and she arrived with a suitcase full of homemade fudge and buttery casseroles. You have to try this, she insisted, placing a gooey chocolate square into Martha's hand. Martha laughed nervously, torn between politeness and her own resolve. She nibbled the edge, savoring the sweet rush of nostalgia. But by the next morning, after indulging in more than she intended, Martha felt heavy, sluggish, and achingly disappointed in herself. For a moment, it seemed as if all her progress had been undone. She stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, her shoulders slumped. You're slipping back, she whispered, back into the person you were. The old voice of self-criticism was harsh, almost cruel. She nearly skipped the next community meeting out of shame, afraid of what her friends would think if she admitted the truth. But something stronger pushed her through the doors of the center that Thursday evening. And when she finally confessed her slip, bracing herself for judgment, the room filled instead with nods of understanding. We've all been there, Jim said with a gentle smile. Elaine squeezed her hand. In that moment, Martha realized that temptation and doubt were not signs of failure, but part of the human journey. The victory was not in never stumbling, but in rising each time she did. Walking home that night under a clear sky, Martha felt a shift deep within her. The battle was not about perfection. It was about persistence, about remembering that she was stronger than her moments of weakness. She promised herself to embrace both the triumphs and the struggles, knowing that each step, forward or backward, was part of the dance of life. And with that acceptance came a quiet strength, one that would carry her through the temptations yet to come. As autumn drifted into winter, Martha found herself standing at a place she had never imagined when she first began this journey. What had started as a quiet attempt to reclaim her own health had blossomed into something larger, something that stretched far beyond her kitchen table or her walks in the park. She was no longer just learning for herself. She had become a bearer of wisdom, someone others turned to when they felt lost. It was a curious thing, for she had never sought to be a teacher, yet life had gently placed that mantle upon her shoulders. One crisp December afternoon, Martha was at the community center when a younger woman named Claire approached her. Claire was in her early 40s, with a tired look around her eyes that reminded Martha of how she herself had looked a year ago. Claire shifted nervously before speaking. Martha, could I ask you something? She said. I watch how you bring those colorful dishes and how you always seem so alive. How do you do it? I can't even make it through the day without coffee and takeout. Martha felt a warmth rise in her chest, not of pride but of recognition. She saw in Claire the same exhaustion, the same longing for change that had once stirred inside her. She invited her to sit down, and over steaming cups of herbal tea, she began sharing not just the foods that had nourished her body, but the small choices that had slowly rebuilt her strength. An apple instead of a cookie, a morning walk instead of staying on the couch, a bowl of lentils simmering with herbs instead of a fast food burger. Claire listened intently, her eyes brightening, as though someone had handed her a lantern in the dark. Word began to spread quietly. Neighbors stopped Martha at the grocery store to ask about the bags of fresh produce in her cart. A retired schoolteacher from her church asked if she might share some of her recipes. Even her daughter, once skeptical, began to call with questions. Mom, how do you roast sweet potatoes the way you do? With every answer, every story she shared, Martha felt the circle widening. Yet passing the torch was not just about food. It was about offering hope. At one gathering, Jim, who had struggled with guilt over his setbacks, confessed how much it meant to see Martha persevere. "When I see you showing up every week, it reminds me that it's possible," he said softly. Martha reached for his hand and replied, "We remind each other. That's how we keep going." She realized then that her role was not to be perfect, but to be present, to show that resilience could coexist with vulnerability. The greatest surprise came when the community center asked Martha to lead a small workshop on simple foods for lasting strength. At first, she laughed at the idea. "Me? I'm no expert," she protested. But Elaine placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're exactly the kind of expert people need, the kind who has lived it." So one chilly Saturday morning, Martha stood before a circle of folding chairs, a basket of fruits and vegetables at her side, and told her story. She spoke of the evenings of temptation, of the mornings when she doubted herself, and of the quiet victories hidden in bowls of soup and long walks at dawn. Her voice trembled at first, but as she looked around and saw the nodding faces, she felt the words flow with ease, like water finding its path. The workshop ended with laughter and shared tastes of the simple dishes she had prepared. A man in his 70s lingered afterward, saying, "I thought it was too late for me, but hearing you, it makes me think maybe I've still got time." Martha's eyes filled with tears. She knew then that her journey had grown into something much larger than herself. It was a ripple spreading outward, touching lives she had never expected. At home that night, she sat by the window with a notebook in her lap, jotting down ideas for the next gathering. She thought of the seeds her grandmother had once planted in her, how those childhood lessons about the garden had quietly shaped her heart. And now, in her own way, she was planting seeds in others, seeds of resilience, of courage, of nourishment that went far deeper than food. She no longer saw herself as someone struggling against age or time. Instead, she felt like a bridge between generations, carrying forward wisdom that could outlast her own years. And as she closed the notebook and looked up at the stars shimmering above the quiet town, Martha whispered a small prayer of gratitude for the strength to change, for the people who had lifted her along the way, and for the chance to pass the torch so that others might find their own light. Winter passed gently into spring, and with it came a transformation that Martha could feel in her bones, not just in her body, but in her very spirit. She moved with a lightness she had not known in years, waking each morning with energy that seemed to rise naturally like the sun. When she glanced at herself in the mirror, she noticed her eyes were clearer, her skin warmer, her posture straighter. But more than that, there was a glow of confidence, a quiet joy that could not be measured in pounds lost or blood pressure numbers. It was something deeper, something she had been missing for far too long, a renewed spirit that made her feel not only alive, but eager for what lay ahead. It began with small things. She found herself humming while tending to her little kitchen garden, delighted by the sprigs of fresh parsley and the tomatoes ripening on the vine. She caught herself laughing at movies again, not the polite chuckle of someone going through the motions, but real, unguarded laughter that shook her shoulders. Even her neighbors noticed. One evening, while she was watering her plants, Mr. Davis from next door leaned over the fence and said with a smile, "You've got a new shine about you, Martha. Haven't seen you look this good in years." She blushed, realizing that this shift inside her was visible to the world. With health returning, her dreams began to stretch further. For years, Martha had quietly shelved the thought of traveling again, telling herself that her body was too tired, her energy too fragile. But now, those excuses seemed to crumble. When Elaine suggested they join a group trip to the national parks, Martha hesitated only for a moment before saying yes. The thought of walking among mountains and rivers once again thrilled her in a way she hadn't felt since her youth. That spring, she found herself standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon, the wind tugging at her jacket, the vast expanse opening before her like a miracle. Tears stung her eyes as she whispered, "I made it." A year ago, she could barely walk around the block without losing her breath. Now she was gazing at one of the world's wonders, strong and steady on her feet. Elaine slipped her arm through Martha's and said softly, "See what happens when you don't give up." Martha only nodded, unable to speak, overwhelmed by gratitude. Travel awakened something that had been dormant inside her, a sense of adventure, of curiosity about life that she thought had slipped away with age. She visited small towns, sampling fresh farmers market produce. She walked through historic streets, savoring every step. She even took a gentle hike with the group, her heart racing not from exhaustion but from exhilaration. Each moment felt like a gift, a reminder that her years were not meant to be counted in decline, but in the richness of experiences still waiting for her. Back at home, her renewed spirit flowed into every corner of her life. Sunday dinners with her daughter were no longer hurried affairs, but joyful gatherings filled with stories, laughter, and healthy meals that surprised even her skeptical son-in-law. "This is really good, Mom," her daughter admitted one evening over a hearty stew. "I thought healthy meant bland, but you've proved me wrong." Martha only smiled, savoring not just the food, but the warmth of family togetherness she had longed to rekindle. The community center also became a place of celebration. She organized small potlucks where everyone brought a dish made with one of the secret foods she had shared. The room would fill with the aromas of roasted vegetables, simmering soups, and fresh-baked whole-grain breads. People who had once complained about their health now shared their small triumphs. A man who lowered his cholesterol, a woman who discovered she could walk farther without pain, Jim beaming with pride after sticking to his routine for months. Martha's eyes often welled with tears as she listened. These were not just meals, they were proof that change was possible at any age. But perhaps the most profound change was within Martha's own heart. For years she had lived quietly, shrinking from dreams, telling herself she was too old, too tired, too late. Now she looked at each day with new eyes. She began to paint again, something she had not done since her husband passed away. She joined a book club and found herself debating stories late into the evening, her mind sharp and curious. She even caught herself wondering about taking dance lessons, something that once would have seemed impossible. The renewed spirit that pulsed through her was not just about health, it was about reclaiming the joy of living. She felt herself blossoming like the flowers in her garden, opening to the world with courage and gratitude. Life, she realized, was not winding down. It was opening up, and she was ready to step fully into it. One night, as she stood on her porch watching the fireflies flicker in the warm air, Martha whispered a promise to herself. "From this day forward, I will not waste another moment doubting what I can do. I will live fully and freely as long as I'm given breath." The words settled in her chest like a vow born not from fear of time running out, but from the thrill of knowing that so much still lay ahead. And with that, Martha closed her eyes and smiled, her renewed spirit carrying her forward into the unknown, stronger and freer than she had ever been. The years that followed carried Martha gracefully into her late 60s and beyond, and while time left its natural marks, her spirit only grew stronger, richer, and more radiant. She no longer measured her days by aches or limitations, but by the moments of joy she created and the people whose lives she touched. What began as a quiet journey to save her own health had blossomed into something far greater, a legacy of strength that would ripple far beyond her kitchen and her table. Her home became a gathering place, not just for family, but for friends and neighbors who sought not only her cooking, but her wisdom. Sunday dinners turned into lively feasts where laughter flowed as freely as the stories shared across the table. Children who once pushed vegetables to the side now reached eagerly for her roasted carrots and leafy green salads, their plates colorful and full. "It's magic," her daughter joked once, though Martha knew it was not magic at all, but the power of food, prepared with love and shared with purpose. The community center classes she once attended as a student eventually became hers to lead. People came not just to learn recipes, but to hear her story. A woman who once sat on her porch weary and hopeless, and who now stood tall, her eyes alight with energy and conviction. "It is never too late," she would say, her voice steady. "Not at 50, not at 70, not at any age. Your body remembers how to heal, if only you give it the chance." Those words lit sparks in the hearts of many who had nearly given up, just as she once had. Her children, too, carried her lessons with them. Her daughter began to weave more wholesome foods into her own household, and Martha watched with quiet pride as her grandchildren grew up strong, their lives touched by habits Martha herself had learned too late, but was determined to pass along. Sometimes her grandson would ask, "Grandma, why do you always say parsley is powerful?" And she would laugh, pulling him close as she explained the wonders of the green sprigs that grew so easily in her garden. These small lessons, she knew, would last long after she was gone. But Martha's legacy was not only in food, it was in the way she lived. She carried herself with resilience and kindness, showing others that strength was not only in muscle or endurance, but in the spirit, in the courage to keep moving forward despite the weight of years. When a friend battled illness, Martha cooked for her. When a neighbor lost his wife, she invited him to her table, knowing that a warm meal could soothe wounds words could not reach. And when Jim, the old man with the tired voice from the community center, passed away, Martha spoke at his memorial, honoring the way he too had chosen not to give up when it mattered most. In quiet moments, Martha sometimes sat by her window and thought about the journey she had traveled. She remembered the loneliness of those first days, the disbelief in her own ability to change. She remembered the laughter of Elaine, the encouragement of the doctor, the first bite of a meal that nourished her instead of weighed her down. She remembered the view of the Grand Canyon, the colors stretching endlessly into the horizon, and the vow she made to live fully for as long as she could. And she smiled because she had kept that vow. As the seasons cycled, Martha grew older, but age did not feel like an enemy anymore. It felt like a companion, one that carried her gently into new chapters, each with its own beauty. She painted, she cooked, she laughed, she traveled, and above all, she loved. Her legacy was not carved in stone or written in books. It was etched into the hearts of the people she nourished, into the meals shared, the gardens planted, the conversations that lingered long after the dishes were cleared. On her 70th birthday, surrounded by family and friends, Martha raised a glass of sparkling water and spoke words that silenced the room. Strength is not about how much you can lift or how fast you can run. It is about showing up every day for yourself and for those you love. It is about choosing life again and again, even when it would be easier to sit in the shadows. The foods we eat, the choices we make, they are simply tools to help us remember that we are worth the effort. And let me tell you, every single one of us is worth it. The applause and cheers that followed were warm and heartfelt, but Martha did not need them. She could see her legacy shining in the faces around her, in her daughter's proud smile, in the laughter of her grandchildren, in the grateful eyes of friends who had once doubted themselves but now stood strong. She had planted seeds, and those seeds had blossomed into a garden larger than she could have ever imagined. And so, as twilight settled on that evening, Martha sat quietly for a moment, watching the candles flicker. The people she loved most gathered close. Her body was older, her hair silver, but her spirit was unbreakable, renewed again and again by love, resilience, and the secret foods that were never really a secret at all. They were simply gifts from the earth. Reminders that strength does not fade with age. It transforms, deepens, and shines brighter when shared. Her story was not one of fading away, but of blooming late, proving to everyone around her that after 50, after 60, after 70, there was still life to be lived fully and joyfully, and that she knew would be her lasting legacy. A spirit that remained strong, a heart that remained open, and a lesson that would live on in every meal, every laugh, and every tomorrow. And so, what began as one woman's quiet fight to reclaim her health became a beautiful reminder that strength and joy are never lost with age. They only grow deeper when we choose to nurture them. Her legacy reminds us all that it is never too late to begin again. Thank you, dear friends, for watching and listening to this story. I'm truly grateful for your time and for being part of this journey with me. If you enjoyed this video, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment below. Share your thoughts, your feelings, or even your own story. We would love to hear from you. Your interaction helps our community grow, and it encourages us to keep bringing you more stories filled with heart and meaning. Until next time, stay strong, stay hopeful, and remember, you are never too late to begin a new chapter.